Today, our university stands very strong because of the values that are inherent in the Northwood idea. And we're blessed to have this evening a leader with us that shares those values. In fact, in many, many different ways, he shares our values. He was, at the time elected, he was then the youngest lieutenant governor in the country. And he's a forward-looking leader intent on building the best Michigan possible for all of our citizens. First elected lieutenant governor in 2010, Brian Calley worked in partnership with Governor Snyder to play an integral role in Michigan's comeback, combining skills acquired from his accomplished service in the private sector and in the financial services industry, along with a heart for public service. Prior to serving as lieutenant governor, Brian served 2 terms in the Michigan legislature, representing his hometown of Portland, and also 2 terms on the Ionia County Commission. And for over a decade, he worked in community banking here in our state. He holds a bachelor's degree from Michigan State University, a master's of business administration from Grand Valley State University, and a master's of public administration from the John F. Kennedy School at Harvard University. Brian's been honored as one of Crain's Detroit Business's 40 under 40 leaders, and has received recognition for his leadership from many, many different organizations across the state. Too many for me to recognize this evening. Maybe most importantly, he made a very good decision based on Northwood values a number of years ago when he married his wife, Julie, a Northwood University graduate. And she is now holds his state representative seats from the 87th district in our state legislature. And together they started their educational journey. She started her educational journey here at Northwood, and I know he has shared with me how many trips he made from East Lansing to Midland to court his wife. And we're proud of both of them today, their leadership for the state of Michigan. So I ask you to give a warm Northwood welcome to the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan, Brian Calley.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the very generous introduction, and especially am flattered to receive the invitation to be here today. And yes, I am well acquainted with the campus. I remember that Julie's room number was in minor, room 4559, because I had to tell the guy at the gate every time who I was going to see, and to prove it, I had to give a room number. But you know, when during that time period when I was going to school at Michigan State and she was here, and we had this thing, we started out where we would meet in Ithaca at the McDonald's, and pretty romantic, right? And but then eventually it started being where something wouldn't work out and she couldn't get to Ithaca, so then it kind of gradually turned into me coming here every Wednesday. And it is really an amazing place. It's the reputation of this place, and the education, the achievements of the graduates, but the quality of the education, and what we're here to talk about tonight when it comes to the values, I think is a really important part of the success, because you can learn principles of business, you can learn accounting and marketing and management, but all of those technical skills operate inside of an environment, and how well you do depends so much on how well you are in terms of the culture that you operate within and that you're a part of creating. And so to be here, so on Founders Day, you know, I think so March 23rd is Founders Day. It'll be easy to remember. It's a couple days from my own personal Founders Day, which is this Saturday. You know, I debuted on March 25th, 1977, and while I am still the youngest lieutenant governor in America, I turned 40 on Saturday, so we'll probably just drop that from my resume at that point. So, what a clap for my birthday! That's great. I'm going to go home and tell Julie all about that. Well, so I thought what I'd do is I wanted to zero in on something that I'm really passionate about, that has been largely people that have been largely overlooked by our communities and by our businesses in terms of the potential and the role that they could play in our world, and such a powerful role that could be played. So I want everybody in the room to go through an exercise with me, which is to think about the thing that you struggle with the most. I want you to think about something that even when you try really hard and you really put your back into it, you still have a hard time with. Right? You heard my bio when I came up here. I could have given you a completely different, equally true, so all those nice things, and they were all true, but I could give you an equally true, much less flattering biography of myself by describing the things that I have struggled with over my life. Right? So here I am speaking in front of you, but I didn't speak until I was 4 years old. I did not speak a single word until I was 4 years old. I needed special education services well into elementary school to develop the ability to communicate. Or I've won a lot of political races, county commission, state representative. I won a state senate seat before I vacated that to join up with the governor in 2010 for this office. But I lost my first political race. 9th grade student council president, to a girl I had just taken to homecoming dance. Yeah, I know, today it still stings right now when I'm telling you about this. But I thought I was really good at math till I got to Michigan State and I needed a tutor to get through calculus. I mean, there are all kinds of things I could give you, all kinds of examples of things I've struggled with, but those aren't the things in my biography. Those are not the things that describe me. They don't define who I am, right? I'm defined according to my strengths, right? I live in a world, and most of us live in a world where we are afforded the courtesy of being defined according to our strengths. We build our lives around our strengths. We make our plans around our strengths. We use our strengths to mitigate our weaknesses. But I want you to imagine that thing that is your weakness or your area of struggle, and what if you were defined by that? What if, when you walked into a room, every single time you walked through the door, the very first thing that people knew about you was your area of struggle? What if the first thing people knew about you are the things that you didn't do very well at? Do you think you'd get a very fair shake at life? What if your business card, instead of saying who you are and what you do, it said who you are and what you struggle with the most? Do you think you'd be able to get a fair shot at proving what you could do? Of course the answer is no, but welcome to the life of a person with a disability. A person with a disability, unfortunately, by our world, is typically defined according to their area of struggle. A person with a disability is often labeled, literally like in their title, the definition of them is about the area of struggle instead of the area of strength. Instead of being afforded that same courtesy, remember, and that's what I consider it really, just a courtesy of being described and thought of in the context of your strengths. And so do you think you'd get a very fair shake at life if that was the case for you? And of course the answer is no. And I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. I'm not talking about charity here. I'm not talking about just out of a big heart saying, you know what, these poor people with disabilities, let's go out of our way to be nicer to them. Let's go out of it. No, what I'm talking about here is seeing potential in value and worth in every single human being. That we don't take the approach that some people are too hard to work with, or it's too hard to create a world where they can be a part of it. Because we're missing out on big things by leaving this group of people out. Because if you think about it, a person with a disability, just to get through the day, has to be determined, right? Has to have a lot of perseverance, has to be creative. Now, don't those sound like great qualities that you'd want in the people around you? People that persevere, people who are creative, people who are determined. I could give you example after example after example of people who have beat the odds, but the sad thing is that we have a world where a person with a disability has to beat odds just to get to the seat at the table. Because really the world was built and designed at a time when they weren't at the table, when institutionalization was the go-to strategy. I don't know, maybe it was a year ago, I shared a story on Facebook, and it was about a man in the Southwest somewhere, and I think it was New Mexico, and he had a restaurant. He has Down syndrome. And he has a restaurant, and he was closing down the restaurant because he met this girl, and they were going to get married, but she's from Colorado. So he's going to close down the restaurant, and he's opening up a new restaurant in Colorado where they're getting married. And it was a great story. I kind of teared up even, reading it. And I shared it on Facebook, and everybody liked it, and it was this great thing. But then it occurred to me, like, why is it, how sad is it that it is national news that a person with a developmental disability is a business owner and is getting married? Like, it's national news. That's how rare that outcome is. And so we need to do a better job of ensuring that that's, and by the way, if you don't have a friend with Down syndrome, you don't know what you're missing out on. I encourage people to go out of your way to make sure that you have people like that in your life. It's people born without the mean gene, right? People that can care about other people and love and appreciate at a whole different level than what the rest of us, quote unquote, regular people can. Now, I've never met a person with Down syndrome that knows how to be anything other than sincere. I work in politics. Do you know how much time I spend trying to figure out what are the sincere intentions of the person that I'm dealing with right now? So I ask you, who is disabled? And what if we did define people according to their strengths? What if we stopped giving up on people? What if we looked at part of our job and our responsibility? We got students in here, and in 10 years from now, you're going to have the keys to the world. All right, you got a great education, you got all this support and the network. And by the way, the network of graduates from this school, right? There's a lot of really important doors that they can help open for you to go out there and get all kinds of opportunities. But the thing is, you're going to have the keys to those doors. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to be a part of creating a world that does not leave people behind? And that's what we need in order to really create the best, most inclusive world. The one where we benefit, where society benefits from everything that everybody has to offer. There was a boy that grew up in Flint in the 1970s and 80s, and he was born without his right hand. He loved sports like everybody else in Flint. I mean, the athletes that have come out of Flint over the years and are still to this day coming out of Flint, it's amazing. And so he just wanted to play sports. He ended up being he was the quarterback on the football team. And he really loved baseball. He wanted to play baseball. But before he could play baseball, he learned how to tie his shoes. Right, so there's no rule book on how to tie your shoes with one hand. Right, there's no instruction manual on this. So Jim had to learn how to do it some other way, and there was an adult in his life, a teacher, who went home every day and just worked on it with one hand, how to tie a shoe. And when he finally cracked the code and worked it out, then he taught Jim how to do it. Now, that was just one of the obstacles along the way. And what's extraordinary about this whole story is that nothing about it is extraordinary. Regular people that took an interest and created opportunity. But what he wanted to do was play baseball. And so he said to his dad, I want to play baseball for the University of Michigan. That was his dream. Now, why not Michigan State? I don't know. But he wanted to play baseball for the University of Michigan. And so they went out to the backyard and they started trying to figure out how he would do this. Because not only do you want to play baseball, you want to be a pitcher. But how are you going to be a pitcher? Because pitcher's got a field. So you can't field with a bare hand. So what they worked out was that he would throw the ball. Now, he was gifted at throwing the ball. And you kind of have an incentive to make sure the ball doesn't come at you if you only have one hand. So what Jim would do is he would throw the ball, right? He'd pitch it. Now, he was left-handed because he was born without his right hand, but I'm right-handed, so I'm going to show you the opposite way. But use your imagination. If there are any purists in the room and you know this story, I know that he was born without his right hand. But when he would throw the ball, right, he'd throw the ball, he'd have his glove hanging on his forearm right here. So he'd throw the ball, and he'd bring his hand back in, and he'd have to slip it into his glove. Now, anybody who's ever put on a baseball glove, you know that your hand doesn't just slip into it, right? You gotta wedge it on there, right? This is not something that happens easy unless you really practice and work hard at it, right? So he'd throw the ball, he'd slip it on his hand, now he's ready to field. So if the ball comes at him, then he's got to field the ball, but now he's got a ball in the glove hand. What is he supposed to do with it? You can't throw the ball out of the glove hand to first base. I mean, not if you expect to get anybody out. So what he'd have to do is he'd have to stick the ball under his arm here, or the glove under his arm. He'd have to pull his hand out, reach in and grab the ball, and then make the play wherever the play's at. It's a lot of steps. When you throw 100 miles an hour and it comes back at you even faster. And these are some of the fastest sprinters you'll find anywhere in the world. But he worked at it, and he worked at it, and he worked at it. And he got so fast that he made the baseball team. And he was striking people out. So many people that scouts started watching him, including a scout from the University of Michigan. And he ended up getting recruited to play there. And that's where I first saw him. My Uncle George said, "You got to see this guy. He's pitching for U of M. He only has one hand, and somehow he just does it, and he's so fast." And I thought maybe he was just joking, because my Uncle George was always joking. And we went there, and it was so fast you couldn't even see what was happening. And Uncle George said, one day he's going to pitch in the big leagues. And he was drafted by the Angels in 1989. Played a little bit more than a decade, including when he played for the Yankees. There's no slackers on the Yankees. There's no charity on the Yankees, including a no-hitter. It's a person at the top of the game. Now, it's an amazing story, right? Jim Abbott from Flint, Michigan did all that. But if we're honest with ourselves, how many kids that were born with a disability like that had the type of support system around them where they could say, "I want to do something amazing with my life, like be a pitcher at the University of Michigan, even though I'm missing my right hand," and have the adults around him or her say, "That makes sense to us. And we're going to do everything that we can do to help you achieve that." I fear that most kids have adults around them that would say something more like, "That's not very realistic for a person like you. You really need to set your sights on something that is more achievable for a person like you." And the longer that we let the world exist in a place where a person is put into a lane because of a preconceived notion about what is possible. And I gave you an example about a man that started a restaurant, and Jim Abbott who pitched for a no-hitter for the Yankees. I could stand here all night and give you story after story after story about people that did things that are outside of what we consider to be the normal, the typical result for a person with a disability. But the point is that it shouldn't be abnormal for people to live full and productive, independent, self-determined lives. That ought to be the normal thing that happens. It shouldn't have to be, or it shouldn't be national news. It should be expected. And we can all be a part of making that happen. It's the idea of seeing the potential and the worth and the value in people and treating them the way that we would want to be treated. Not defined according to our area of struggle, but given a shot at achieving our dreams. Now let me, I want to take a few questions. So think of a few questions if you'd like that I can address in a minute. I just want to talk about very quickly just a couple of additional groups of people that I want you to think about, okay? People that no matter how good the economy gets, don't seem to be a part of the good things that are happening. All right, disabilities, I bet everybody in the room at least conceptually thinks, yeah, that makes sense to me. I want to try and make the world work better for a person with disabilities. I hope it goes beyond just a good feeling at the moment, and that it's something that when you are in a position of making decisions, that you really take this into consideration in terms of the way the organizations you're a part of operate. There are also people that are struggling with addiction in our state. And we have this notion about addiction, right? We've tried to treat addiction with the law enforcement system for the last many decades. And I think it's safe to say at this point that treating addiction with law enforcement has been a spectacular failure. It deserves a healthcare response, right? Addiction is a healthcare issue. And so we need to really treat addiction if we expect to have better outcomes. But we tend to have the type of society that wants to throw away people that have addiction instead of believing in their potential and seeing their value and wanting to help them get back in a place of being successful. And so this is just another area of a group of people that is kind of set aside, a group of people that's so much of society is given up on, but it's affecting so many families and it's affecting every community, and it's definitely not something that is tied to any one socioeconomic group. This is something that is all across the board affecting every type of family you can think of in every community across our state and across our country. So this is something that we really have to be serious about and not give up on people. And then here's the hardest one. And I just want to warn you that I understand that this is the hardest one. The thing I'm asking next is the hardest one. But, you know, when people go to prison, almost every person who goes to prison will someday get out. And we have this revolving door where people get out, and then there's no place except for wherever they were that landed them in prison in the first place. And I'm really talking some about forgiveness here, but even if you want to look at it from in redemption, but even if you want to look at it from a standpoint of self-interest, that the cost of recidivism is not how much it costs to house a person for a year in prison or jail, right? That is a cost. It's not the most expensive cost. The most expensive cost is the fact that a new victim has been created because a new crime has been committed. But what if we dealt with the root cause of the crime in the first place? Untreated mental illness sometimes, or addiction, or the culture and kind of scenario, the circumstance where a person was born, or survival mode for whatever reason. You know, in Ionia at the Handling Correctional Facility, we started something called Vocational Village, and people in that prison can earn their way into learning a vocation. When they get out, we connect them to an employer who is desperate in a critical work shortage area, so desperate that they're willing to hire a person with a felony on their record. And the results, we've only been doing it for a year, so I can't give you long-term recidivism statistics, but we have prisoners now getting job offers while they're still in prison. So it must be working pretty well. And while I don't have statistics because it's too new, doesn't it stand to reason that a person that gets out with some kind of prospects in their life would have a better outcome than those who get $50 in a bus ticket? And so as we look at the world and where it is today, and we see these macroeconomic trends that are going in a good direction, I just want to make sure that we are always sensitive to the fact that certain communities or certain groups of people are not a part of the good things that are happening. And I hope that we can look at it as part of our responsibility to connect with that, or to be a part of fixing it, to being a part of creating a world that works better for more people. It is smart business And I probably should have given more examples or some examples about the businesses that are focusing on this, because there's this amazing intersection between doing what's right and good business. And so there are so many, right around here even, the things that Dow was doing in creating opportunities for people with disabilities. The things that DTE in the city are doing with returning citizens, or with in Grand Rapids with people with developmental disabilities, the Hope Network getting connected to opportunities and internships, or Project Hope that a lot of our hospitals, or Project Search that a lot of our hospitals are a part of today. And it's just good, smart business, because you're finding people. There's one, I met a guy just last week, and he had worked in a company that makes bulletproof vests for the military. So we do a lot of military contracting in Michigan. It kind of happens under the radar screen, but he makes bulletproof vests. You know how long he'd worked there? 20 years. Now, could you imagine? He has a developmental disability, an intellectual disability, and he doesn't have any kind of, he's same type of productivity is required of him as of every other employee there. Could you imagine what a dream that would be? I don't know how many people in the room are employers, but if you had 20-year-long employees, I mean, you celebrate if you can make it to 5 years these days with an employee. And you have all this turnover and things, that have a person that is that loyal and that good, and what good business it is to give a person a chance who doesn't usually get a chance and isn't going to mess it up. You can be there every day and give it their all and lift the culture of the whole organization. That's if there's one last impression I want to leave with you, is that all this stuff, I think it's the right thing to do to try and make the world work better for people that get left out, but it's not out of a charitable heart. It makes good business sense to do it, so think about trying it. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of that with you tonight. I want to thank you for really having the type of code of ethics that you do, and focusing on it, and taking on more responsibility than the P&L. As the P&L, you got to have the P part of it if you're going to be sustainable. But the answer to how to do it in the right way is a lot bigger than that. And so when you focus on ethics, and you make that part of the educational experience, and you have it ingrained in people as they go out there and take control of the world, you're going to get a better world. So that's what you're about. And thank you for the opportunity to share some time with you tonight. Thank you. And I could take some questions. There's a microphone right over here if anybody has any questions. On both sides, actually. Okay, good. I'll try and keep my answers short.
Thank you for speaking, Lieutenant Governor Calley. I wanted to ask you about your last point, specifically on recidivism here in the state of Michigan. While there's no obvious silver bullet to cure that problem, do you think that there could be a state-implemented initiative that would help our prison systems reintegrate people back into our society?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so you got two places where a person might serve out a sentence. So it could be in a county jail, or it could be in a prison. Shorter sentences happen in county jails, longer sentences happen in prison, and they tend to be more serious convictions that would land a person in prison. And so the population that we at the state are dealing with can be a very challenging population. The key is that we have to be about getting to the bottom of the reasons why the person ended up on the wrong side of the law in the first place. It does take a certain amount of forgiveness. And that's the hardest part, because making investments in people that have hurt us in some way, that's really, when you're talking about like appropriations, and you got all these different important things, but you say that, listen, we want to do skilled trades education in our prisons. We're doing it in the Hanlon Correctional Facility in Ione now. We're going to add a couple more in Jackson, because it's working, and it's a smart investment. I think of like smart on crime. So that's one of the things that we can do, but we have to be better at what happens on the front end in the conviction area as well. So if a person is going through the process, the better we are at identifying when a person committed a crime under the context of, like the first degree type crimes, premeditated and in the more serious of offenses, and when it was tied to a different root-based problem, like addiction. For example, if a person is addicted to something and that's the root cause of the problem, until we deal with the addiction, we're not going to have good long-term outcomes. If we have a person that committed a crime and it's connected to untreated mental illness, then putting a person in prison, and then they're going to get out and they still have untreated mental illness, and you're just going to have a cycle. It's going to keep on repeating. And so that's what we're trying right now to really bolster, to beef up, is the idea of problem-solving courts. There's still going to be punishment for breaking crimes. I'm not talking about elimination of sentencing and that sort of thing. What I'm talking about is connecting people to the things that they need in order to deal with the thing that led to them to the breaking the law in the first place. And so we started, like, drug courts and sobriety courts are something that started in Kalamazoo, and it started spreading across our state. Now it's the norm across the state. So for, like, sobriety and alcoholism, it has proven to be very, very effective. And sometimes it's complicated and sometimes pretty simple. I went to a drug court graduation. I met a young man in his early 20s. He'd been in and out of jail 3 times, but he kept on drunk driving, kept on getting caught again and back in. But he was a year sober, and he was graduating from drug court. And I asked him, what is the difference this time? He said, well, every Friday I met with the judge. And I slipped up a few times, and I had to go back to jail, but just for the weekend, and I didn't lose my job because it was just for the weekend, and we got right back on track, and I kept on meeting with the judge. So what is it? So the judge, was he that scary? Like every Friday you had to, like, be accountable to him? And he said, no, it's just the first time in my life that somebody cared whether I succeeded or failed. And so sometimes, how sad, but how simple. Sometimes it's a simple answer, but what we're finding with more addictive substances like opioids, heroin, OxyContin, that classification of drug, that the addiction and the change in the brain is much more powerful. And so there's been a resistance within our judicial system to insert medicine into the process, medically assisted treatment, but we know that our success rates are well over 80% when it comes to medically assisted treatment for a person who is addicted to opioids. Without that, it's almost zero. And so we now have about a dozen courts that are piloting this, and it gives me hope that we're gonna get to the bottom of it, that because it's gonna work. And then other courts are going to do it. And it's going to become the norm across. We have mental health courts and veterans courts, and they really are about getting to the bottom of the root problem. Now, with the mental health courts, we see with supervised treatment that the recidivism drops way down at the end of the probation period, and the supervised treatment ends, the recidivism goes right back up. So we know, because our actions are dictated by the data and the outcomes. We know that this model that we have for addiction, where you kind of break the addiction, you change the habits, you deal with the medical issues, and then the person's has a high rate of success when they're on their own. With mental illness, we're finding that's not quite the case. So we have to do something different. Maybe it's longer term treatment that is supervised and accountable, or maybe it's a different type of an environment or a setting that a person's in, but because we're using the data, we can get better outcomes. So what I'm hopeful for is that not only will we do better in terms of giving people a different course of action after imprisonment, that we'll do better on the front end of determining when imprisonment is even appropriate and how to deal with the problem earlier, so that we can avoid the incarceration and really help the person and society, the community they live in, their family, get back on track much earlier than the traditional system. We can do it. This is something that we can do. And I'm just excited because there's more energy and more people involved, more people willing to do it than I've ever seen in the 10 years I've been involved in it. About one more. We got another. Anybody else have a?
Now, you spoke about how us young students have the key to open such a huge world. But what kind of advice can you give to a student that's about to graduate and enter in and support this issue we see happening in our world?
Yeah, great question, because you're about to find out that even though you have a degree, you don't start out in charge of anything, right? I graduated from Michigan State. I had a management degree, but I wasn't really qualified to manage anything at that point, right? I mean, it's experience. You got to start at something, but you can be a part of the the development of the culture in all kinds of settings where you're at. Work is only one of those places. So whether it's in your church or whatever you do in your community or your social circles, when you go out of your way to create inclusion opportunities for people that don't necessarily have those types of opportunities. My only caveat on that, though, is I want to impress upon you that I don't want you to approach it just out of charity. I don't want to be like this poor person and we're going to have, it's the idea that I'm going to create an opportunity for this person to shine. And I'm going to give them access to something. I'm going to open a door that they've never had open for them and see what can happen. And so think of it like any other relationship. It's just that you're going out of your way to build that with a person that maybe gets shut out of it in other types of settings. So employment is huge, and I hope that you remember when you're making employment decisions, you're making policies on how you hire and where you hire and the type of environment that you have, and that you're not just open to hiring people with disabilities, that you make sure that it happens. But it's not just hiring. That's a big part of it, but it's the rest of the world too, and how it works. And you can really do a lot to create the let me put it this way, you can get good at it before you're in charge. When I mean good at it, I mean good at seeing potential. Experience, like seeing a person thrive and live out a better self because you created that opportunity for them. We have, I thought maybe we had another question somewhere. All right. Well, very good. Thank you so much for do you have one? Yeah, please.
Can you hear me? I've been lucky enough I have like a 504 plan because I have like severely bad ADHD. And I know in high school I got like a lot of crap for it just because people are like, oh, is it that severe? Like, oh, it's a neurological disorder, but it's not a physical disorder. And there are people who fake it and people who like decide to just like, because I got extended time on like the ACD, things like that. And there are people that go out of their way to make sure that they have those privileges when they really aren't deserving of them. So what do you think about 504 plans and like the qualifications as to how to be accepted with them?
Yeah, well, great question, and thanks for having the courage to stand up and be counted. When we came to realize that my middle daughter has autism, it was, I guess I'll just bluntly say it, we hid from it, right? We were afraid of what people would think. We were, the stigma is so heavy, but it's empowering when you're willing to tell the story, when you're willing to say, hey, you know me, and you see what I can do, and I'm one of the people that we're talking about here. And it really does help to open people's minds. So thanks for having the courage to stand up and be counted. The question that you raised in terms of qualification, I wish that our education system, the idea of having an IEP, an individualized education plan, I wish that it worked better. I mean, this is a policy area for the last year that I've really zeroed in on, and I'm trying to fix. Because we have cases where where funding is based on labels and access to different services is based on this qualification criteria, instead of just putting the kid in the middle of it and just asking the question, just like Jim Abbott's teacher did, what does this child need to be successful? And instead of expecting the child to conform to the artificial constructions, you get all kinds of different results like unintended consequences when you create a system and expect the kids to somehow fit into the system. So you got somebody who maybe needs other extra help, or they're struggling, or they're not making it here, and well, if I got that label there, then maybe if I could fit into this thing over here, that I could get a little extra help, or I get a little extra attention. But what if we didn't do it that way? I mean, what if we had, not just for kids that have a neurological difference, but for any kid, like if it's a kid that learns math better working with his or her hands. It's like when my son was struggling with geometry. In theory-based education, he struggles with, but we go out in the garage and we start cutting wood, and it makes sense, right? It's a different type of an approach. And that's where I think we really need to get to, is an education system where we put the kid in the middle of it, particularly in primary education. You put the kid right in the middle of everything that we do, and then we expect all the adults to conform to the needs of that child to go out there and live their best selves. And then you don't have this this situation where people are trying to, well, I need a little extra help, so I've got to qualify for this, or I got to bend the rules over here for that. But instead, it's just a system that puts the kids in the center of it, and then defines the actions of the adults according to the kids. So that's what my dream in our education system is, that instead of special education and general education, we just have education, and the education would conform to whatever the needs of the kids are, and that there would be an expectation of that every kid could learn, and that if a kid isn't learning, we wouldn't assume that it's because the kid can't learn. We would assume it's because we haven't figured out or cracked the code that is required in order to help this person achieve their best potential. So I'd say too, and he wouldn't mind my sharing because he's public about it, there's a very important, the longest serving person on my staff has ADHD, and has for, I don't know when, I mean, since he was a kid, and still has a treatment regimen that he's on right now. Is one of the brightest, most creative people that you would ever meet, and the things that he can do with graphics and fonts. You know, I didn't know about how you, like with fonts, he'd say, well, this is a positive message, so we need to use a positive looking font. And this is a very serious message, so we need a serious font. What are you talking about? You know, and let me show you. And so we looked at it, and it was like, wow, there was just something that I never thought about, or I never really saw, that he could see. And I don't know if it's because he has ADHD or what, but I mean, he's so creative, and there's a strength in there that he could build a career around. And so I look at it like, it's not, so he has a neurological difference. It's not that he's successful in spite of the difference. That difference is just part of who he is. And he was able to find his strength, just like I found my strength. And he built his life around it, just like I built my life around my strengths. And I just wish that was the outcome for more people. Well, for everybody who is a part of this and taking the ethics discussion so seriously, and for all the things that I know that you're going to do when you go away from this place, thank you, and I can't wait to see what you're able to do with the rest of your life. Congratulations.